I'm delighted to have been invited to come and launch this book in Ireland. We launched it in London at the beginning of this month, and it's wonderful to have a second opportunity to celebrate it. So, as we know from this morning, everyone needs to know about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And Mary's presentation before lunch really put you in the picture about the situation in Ireland. I'm going to say a few words about the situation in the UK, where we agreed to follow it in 2009, so earlier than in Ireland. But as you know from this morning, it means we've signed up to protect and promote the human rights of disabled people. The UK does not do this well. It does lots of things badly, I think, but that one is really poor. And a report to the committee, by the committee, that Mary mentioned this morning, in 2016, said that the government had failed to check the impact of its policies on disabled people. What does that mean? It makes cuts and changes to the benefit system, and it does not audit their impact on disabled people, and yet it signed up to do that. It is very difficult in our situation to persuade the government to take any regard of it. I think you're in a better position here, and you have got the opportunity to get government to listen to you, and we have fantastic spokespeople. So I think that's really good news for Ireland. It's not such good news for me, but there we go. So why did we put the book together? We put the book together to help people think about the UN CRPD. Not many people talk about it. Not enough people talk about it. Not enough people know about it and know to use it to get their rights respected. So that's why we thought a book with people's stories about how they've managed to get their rights respected might be a good idea. So I think, again, this repeats what was said this morning, but there's no harm in that, because our mission is that people know about the UN CRPD. It's to make sure people with any kind of disability living anywhere in the world, sorry, it says word there, get the same rights as other people. And it was created in 2006 by the United Nations. I think it's interesting that there's already a UN convention for everybody, but they decided we need a special one for disabled people because they are particularly disadvantaged when it comes to their rights being respected. So one of the issues is that lots of people still live in institutions. They don't have their own homes. They can't do what Alan told us about, where in his home decide when to go to bed, when to get up, when they want to eat, what they want to eat. They don't have those rights. That's why it's so important.
It took me 10 years to get a council house.
It took you 10 years.
It did.
Well done. But you got there.
Yeah.
There are many people who are still
I know.
in that queue. So that's why we need a convention. It is vitally important. And it's vitally important that we think about it and that we use it.
And now this is the time because the elections are coming up in a few weeks.
It's a good time for you to think about it. Yes, it definitely is. And we have a plan in England where we have a manifesto about a good life, which we're going to take to every MP, every person who'd like to be in Parliament when eventually we get an election in the UK. And that's based on the UN CRPD. Why stories? I think this morning illustrated how stories are really powerful ways of getting people to take notice and to understand. And I think the story that Kaylee told us about her audit of the Orchid unit, the stories that William tells about his life on the buses, trying to get on buses, sometimes not managing it. The stories we heard about having your own home. they are so important. They remind us, bring it all home. Rights are such a sort of woolly subject. You know, they're out there, they're in the, well, rights are really good. But actually, until we hear about, well, what does it mean not to have rights? What does it look like when you get them? That's why we thought a book of stories about citizenship and about rights would be a way of getting the convention noticed. And I think today is an illustration that maybe that works, at least in some places. I was privileged to be involved in this book, Know Me As I Am, which was published in 1990. And it was one of the first books to highlight the voices of people with intellectual disabilities. 1990, that's not so long ago. When we went out, we collected stories, poems, pictures from about 200 people across the UK. We didn't venture into the Republic of Ireland on that occasion. We did have Northern Ireland. We thought there wouldn't be much of interest in it. You know, we thought people would say, oh, I got up, I went to the day centre, I came home, had my tea and went to bed. It wasn't like that at all. It was so powerful, varied, and important. It was like we're not just a disability, you know. We play the piano, or we play hockey, or disability is just a small part of us, as that film at the beginning of today's presentation, that point was made there. So I think this book, published in 2023, I think it just got into 2023, is a kind of follow-on, but let's highlight rights as the focus of those stories. And it's positive stories, mostly, about how people do get their rights, and sort of stories we heard this morning, I think, rather than the ones about, which there are plenty of those too, about not getting the rights. So we organised the book around the UNCRPD, and a bit like this morning, we played with the UNCRPD because there's too many articles. We didn't want 30 chapters, and we didn't have anything to say on some of them. There was a lot more to be said on some than others. So we kind of grouped them to create the chapters, and you'll see how we did that. We reached out to people we knew to say, would you like to be part of this book? And I have to say, my hair, you know, it's grey now. Well, it wasn't grey before. The practical challenges, I thought, would be very big to getting stories, because a lot of people with intellectual disabilities, it's not a natural thing to write down your stories. Yes, to tell them on a video, or to do the sorts of things we saw this morning, but actually to sit down and write something. But people did respond amazingly with support to that challenge. We had some online writing workshops to help people think about what to do. But I was bowled over by the enthusiasm and commitment that people showed. Yes, we want these stories in there. So it's about 100 people contributed, and it's intended to be a celebration of achievements rather than a litany of failure. It was very interesting to me that when I looked back at the book, and I don't know if this would be true in Ireland, but very little of the support had come from social care services. It had come from universities like UCC, and there were some other universities involved. It had come from advocacy groups. It had come from family members and friends, but not much from services. And yet we think about services, when we think about people's lives, they're what we think about often. But actually, they didn't step up, except Claire. And the Brothers of Charity were the exception. And, well, you'll tell everybody about the Brothers of Charity initiative, won't you? So I won't go into it. But mostly it was from advocacy groups, some universities, and family members and friends. And so this is the way we organised the the chapters. So chapter 2, a very popular chapter, but we had to push some of the Clare stories out of chapter 2. They all wanted to be in education and learning. There was so much in there that we asked them if they would mind being in another chapter. And I'd like to, for the Clare people to take a bow. So first of all, we have Lisa. I think we'll hear more from them in a minute, but you can just wave at everybody, and when I say your name, Lisa Atchison, whose poem is in there and opens the book. Then there are the students from whom we heard this morning. Their contribution is called It's Only Right, Recognising and Including Students with Intellectual Disability in Higher Education in Ireland, and it's all about the why the what's it called? The DIP matters. Why your course matters. Your Certificate in Disability Inclusive Practice course matters. And then Brian Hogan's Tracking the Changes. Can you wave, Brian, please? Brian Hogan's chapter contribution is in there too. Chapter 3, we don't have any Irish contributions in Chapter 3. It's about self-determination. Chapter 4, safety and protection. Orla has a story in there, and it's called, and I think this will tell you what it's going to say. If my child had a disability, they'd be better off in the local school. And Lisa, again, aiming to educate the broader community. So we'll hear more about that later, I'm sure. Chapter 5 is on independent living, and if Alan would have said a lot if we'd asked him to on that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would have said a lot more.
Chapter 6 on health and well-being, and perhaps we should have asked Kaylee for another contribution on that too. Chapter 7, women and family. Chapter 8, travel and mobility. William would have made a wonderful contribution on that. We can't have you everywhere, though. Chapter 9, community and culture. And in there we have Joe McGrath. Joe, it's about contributing to society. And chapter 10, work and money. And I thought you talked a lot about work this morning. This is, I thought, a really interesting chapter. It shows you that you need determination, support, resilience and luck in finding the right employer to get a job. It can be done, but all the ducks need to be lined up. And the system does not make it any easier. The system doesn't help. Right. Chapter 11 is about liberty and justice. And actually this is something we didn't talk about this morning, but the way people experience the criminal justice system is often really appalling. It doesn't take note of the fact that people might not understand what's going on, that the language of the law is very, very excluding of more people than people with intellectual disabilities. So it's about efforts that have been made to try to put that right. They're very tiny efforts, and it's hardly made any progress, I'd say. And chapter 12, the last chapter, is on equality and recognition, and there we have Ger Minogue talking about everything about us without us, ? So that's the book, and you don't need to hear, well, yes, just a few things. What does the book tell us? It tells us people can tell their stories and includes those with severe impairments. And we have a little film, but I'm not sure if we have time to show it. It shows that a good life is achievable. Imagination, determination, energy, and support. And as I've said, support has come from families, self-advocacy groups, universities, not often from services. Low expectations are a curse of the education system. They are an absolute blight on people's lives. And I don't know why we've set up an education system which tells people they can't do things, when actually we can see from this morning that they can. But somehow schools don't seem to help that process. Do you agree, Alan?
One thing I find very hard for us in town of Westcroft is that there's no transport at night. If you want to go out to a night out in town, there's no transport.
No transport at night. Yes, there are lots of sort of things, infrastructure things, aren't there, that make being a full citizen difficult.
I would love, like, the city gets all the transport, the country gets nothing
Yes,
at night.
yeah.
If you want to go to a night out somewhere with friends or anything, there's no transport.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah. Well, your campaigners get campaigning, I think, is the is the message on that. But it came out so strongly. For a lot of your stories were about that. I thought the stories that this group here were telling, how school was not a good experience and rebuilding confidence after school took a long time. Yeah. Yes, it was very striking how common that message was. And I don't really know why. Why do we want to stop people thinking they can do things? And finally, I think the message is, let's get out and collect more stories of people, how people get a good life, as an inspiration to others. I think I think we've got some money for this now. We are going to go and do some road shows around the book, but they will be getting more people involved in telling their stories. And an easy read version of it is the other bit that the money is supposed to pay for.
It'd be great if we could get the book out there to all the centres and all that before people.
It would be good, and I think if we can manage to do an easy read version, we might be able to do that. So that's the next step for the book, because people can say, I ought to say this before I shut up and listen to everybody else. People might say, why have you done a book? Why haven't you done a film? Why haven't you done a website? My answer would be that books hang around. You could still find a copy of Know Me As I Am from 1990. I'm not sure that, well, how long ago was 1990?
34 years.
34 years. I'm not sure that in 34 years a website would still be there. And that is why I think a book is worth doing, even though there are more accessible ways of doing things. So you can fight me back on that if you want to. I'd be very happy to hear your views. But that's the last thing I'm going to say. And thank you so much for listening.